that necessarily diminishes the United States is the kind of dangerous zero-sum thinking that will get us into a lot of trouble if we persist in that. And you're right, Rob, that the playbook is the Cold War, and there is a reading of the Cold War that, God, didn't we do great? You know, we went toe-to-toe with the Soviet Union, and they ended up collapsing. That's not how I read the Cold War. I read the Cold War as strongly unnecessary, extraordinarily dangerous, almost brought the world to annihilation. Annihilation, I'm not using the term casually. And something that we should be trying to avoid desperately, not to go back to that kind of danger which existed in that time.
Yeah. I'll cite my acquaintance and recently partner in making a video, Daniel Ellsberg, whose book, The Doomsday Machine, talks about not just the bilateral conflict, but the burning of the upper atmosphere and the nuclear winter that can destroy, basically turn us into an ice age and destroy the food sources all over the earth. And
no one has been more vivid, more correct, more perspicacious than Daniel Ellsberg about these risks. That's a phenomenal book, The Doomsday Machine, but it's based on a phenomenal history. He was assigned, as you know very well, as a RAND officer after being a brilliant student in the first days of game theory at Harvard.
That's right.
He was assigned to look at nuclear policy of the United States, and he came to the horrifying realization that we had a finger on not only on the button, but on the button that would destroy the whole world, and that our doctrine was just about any accident could trigger a full-scale nuclear attack that by U.S. intelligence estimates would take out 700 million people or so, because it was going to be an attack to destroy the Soviet Union and China. Even if China wasn't directly involved, why not? We should target them as well. And then, as usual with the idiocy of our intelligence agencies, they didn't understand any of the atmospheric dynamics and the physics that would have ended our lives too.
I think that, there's a funny kind of blind spot that I saw you take on that BBC program, which is a lot of people in the United States say China is an authoritarian country and they don't treat people right. And in some regions, there's pretty good evidence for that. And you said, yeah, but what about how the United States treats people like African Americans and runs its prison systems and all the kind of things, that we're not in a place where, what you might call, we're going to go save the world unless we change how we practice what we preach ourselves. And I thought you're standing up to that mind frame really created quite a luster, quite a momentum in that conversation on BBC.
I have a foreign policy doctrine I call Jesus' foreign policy, because in the gospel, of course, Jesus famously says, why do you point to the mote in the other's eye when you have the beam in your own eye? And what Jesus is doing in the Gospels is explaining basically how not to judge in the wrong way. And he is saying you better take care of your own base, your own ethics, in order to be able to be ethical with regard to others as well. We have, of course, a terrible blind spot. Here the United States has walked out of the Paris Climate Agreement under Trump, walked out of the World Health Organization under Trump, walked out of UNESCO, cut aid, behaved atrociously, imposed unilateral sanctions. That's all abroad, not to mention all of the civil rights and human rights violations at home. And the first thing we do when the when the Biden administration comes in is point the finger at them, even in the shadow of the insurrection that we had on January 6th.
Yes.
Well, that's not how to behave. How we should behave anyway with the new administration is to meet and say, let's hope for good cooperation and that we can come to mutually beneficial understandings. That's how you greet someone anyway as a civilized human being. But in Alaska, we did just the opposite. We opened first words. What about Xinjiang? What about Hong Kong? What about Taiwan? Fighting words, the very first moment of interchange, as if the United States didn't have a lot of explaining to do about having a weird psychopathic president over the preceding 4 years, and can we pick up the pieces to get something normal going again. So
Yes.
this is my basic point, which is, we need to behave in a civilized way so that we can have a civilized relationship with other countries. And in a nuclear-armed world, it's insane to do otherwise.
I've seen you in the halls of the Vatican. I've seen the things you're exploring on what you might call framing the relationship between economic theory and the deeper moral teachings.
Well, I do think, as you know, what Pope Francis is telling us is extremely pertinent for us. He's written two wonderful encyclicals, one called Laudato Si, which is about climate change and about environmental destruction. And he says, do not destroy creation. We depend on it. We are a part of this world, and nature doesn't forgive. It will kick back very hard. And then he wrote a second encyclical called Fratelli Tutti, a brotherhood of all, or brotherhood and sisterhood of all, properly translated. And it's really a perfect accompaniment to the Sustainable Development encyclical, because it's about encounter with others. So it's framed around the Good Samaritan who helps the person in the road. And it's basically wisdom, pastoral wisdom of how to get along in this world. And I think that is part of ancient truths. Of course, the ancient world also had its nonstop wars and genocide, so it's not as if they knew necessarily better, but the teachings of how to get along we can remember as being extraordinarily important. And Pope Francis is basically saying right now, we need a world that recognizes its interdependence. We need, actually, he says, we need a plan for our common home. And he's absolutely right about that.